Hello and welcome to the 36th lecture in the series of Knowledge Mile webinars, part of the Lord Mayor's lectures on behalf of Professor Michael Manelli, whose theme for his mayoral year is Connect to Prosper. In this series of online lectures, we address the connections in and around the square mile of the City of London, connections which can and are help us to tackle the challenges facing the world today. I'm Kevin Parker, Director of KKI Associates and Science Advisor to ZN Group in the City of London. I'll be sharing this session and taking questions and answers afterwards. This is the plan for today. An introduction from myself, our keynote lecture from Dr. Heather Barrett-Mold and Professor Alistair Griffiths, then approximately 20 minutes of questions and answers. To introduce our distinguished speakers, Dr. Heather Barrett-Mold, OBE, is Vice Chair of the Pollinating London charity, a past master at the Gardeners Livery Company, founder member of the Livery Climate Action Group. Heather is a chartered scientist, a chartered horticulturist, and a chartered environmentalist. She's a member of the Government Advisory Panel on Sustainable Development Education for its lifetime of 5 years, and an advisor on the Secretary of State Sounding Board. She's a Fellow of the Linnean Society, Vice President of the Institution of Environmental Science, past President of the Institute of Horticulture, and previous Chair of the Science Council. And that is a synopsis. Professor Alistair Griffiths, Director of Science at the Royal Horticultural Society, a Fellow of the Institute of Horticulture, and a board member on Plant Network. Alistair has a background in both horticulture and science. He started his horticultural education at Myerscough College. He moved to the University of Reading to obtain botany BSc and a botany PhD in 2001. Prior to the RHS, he spent a decade managing a team as head scientist at the world-famous Eden project in Cornwall as they tackled unique horticultural challenges that life in the biomes threw their way. Alistair is responsible for ensuring that the RHS charity remains at the forefront of horticultural science. He loves to inspire, motivate, and engage people about the role of plants and horticulture in benefiting the environment and our health and well-being. His ambition is to build a more resilient gardening community who enjoy their gardens whilst reducing their impact on the planet. And I'm looking forward very much to hearing the presentation. So without further ado, I'm going to hand over to our two speakers.
Thank you so much. And it's really good to be here representing the Worshipful Company of Gardeners, but also doing this in combination with the Royal Horticultural Society and my colleague and friend, Alistair Griffiths. So really interesting. I thought I'd start off today by just sort of trying to unpack this term of horticulture and gardening. It's something that people do find a bit confusing. So I thought it would be quite useful to just go through that first of all. So the Worshipful Company of Gardeners, first known 1345, didn't get chartered until 1605. But interestingly, when you look at the charter, it spells out exactly what gardening meant at that time. And at that time, it was said that gardening was the trade, craft, or mystery of gardening, planting, grafting, setting, sowing, cutting, arbouring, rocking, mounting, covering, fencing, and removing of plants, herbs, seeds, fruits, trees, stock, sets, and of contriving the conveyances to the same belonging. So this, even though it was called gardening at that time, is what we now call horticulture. That full range of all aspects of working with plants is what we now call horticulture. So even though we're still called the Worshipful Company of Gardeners, it's really all about horticulture and the breadth of horticulture. So today we would define horticulture as the science, technology, art, business of cultivating and using plants to improve human life. Horticulturists and horticulturist scientists create global solutions for safe, sustainable, nutritious food and healthy and restorative and beautiful environments. So again, really, really broad. And the number of careers that there are in horticulture are massive. So some in labs, some working with trees, all sorts of different types of careers there. And horticulture is really important for the production of food. The line with agriculture can get a bit blurry, but largely the production of food where it's not on a sort of field scale, where it's a bit more protected often, then that tends to sit under horticulture. And so tomatoes, peppers, cucumbers, all sorts of things which we produce are considered to be part of horticulture. So it's entirely appropriate to be looking at the impact that horticulturists have on green spaces in general, and planting. And so that's what we're going to try and do today by saying we in the royal we sense. I'm going to hand over to Alistair, and Alistair is going to pick this up. So, Alistair, over to you.
Thank you very much, Heather. So I just wanted to start off by talking about a thing that people don't really recognize in society, that humans use more different types of cultivated ornamental plants than any other plant types in the world. So for food plants, there's about 50,000 different types of plants, medicinal plants, 34,408, and ornamentals in the RHS plant finder shows there's 81,000 different types of plants that we use, many of which you probably pass in the streets on a daily basis or actively engage with in your gardens. And just to compare that in relation to the native plant species, there's about 1,500. So these cultivated landscapes and these ornamental plants play a significant role in doing that. Not only that, is that the areas of this space, or as a habitat, there are 700,000 hectares of domestic garden. In urban areas, 29.5% is domestic garden. There are 30 million domestic gardeners. And during COVID lockdown, 88% of Britain shared a garden or actively went into a garden during that lockdown. So they're an essential part of our habitats of where we live. And here are just some very critical key things that have been proven scientifically around elements of aspects of how gardening and garden plants help in relation to the mind, the body, and the soul. So I'm going to take you through some of these aspects using specific examples that we've done on the ground in collaboration with other universities. So the first one is a survey that we did, which was spending time in a garden, and we found it's positively associated with health and well-being. This was work done with collaboration with DeBell and others at the Exeter Peninsula Medical School. And we did a survey of just under 8,000 people. And what we found that those gardening and using the garden reported better health and well-being, more physical activity, and more nature visits than those who did not. Compared to no garden access to a private garden was associated with better evaluative well-being. So in effect, people with access to a private space, such as a balcony yard, were also more likely to meet their physical activity guidelines. So a second project, which was we had an RHS Wellbeing Fellowship with the University of Sheffield and Lauriane Chalmain-Pugh, and I co-supervised this project. And this is linked to a street in Salford. We work with For Housing, which is a housing social provider, and United Utilities, which is a water company, to undertake this project. So this is the street, and all we did was a very small intervention. So we went in that street, we worked in their small area outside their terrace, and we created 2 tiny planters and choices of trees. And you can see actually, a shift in the change of that street just by having trees along that street, making a difference. And what we did is we measured the perceived stress scale of this work with a control street as well to look at the differences. And what we found was there's a 6% decrease in perceived stress. So that's equivalent to 8 weekly mindfulness sessions on the NHS after measured 6 months. Also, we saw in the cortisol patterns that we measured, we saw 24% of the population having healthy cortisol patterns, and that shifted to 53% after that. not only that, there were some really sound qualitative aspects of that that enhanced that street. So a good example of that was that, it gives people pride. Um, and of that whole area, and it did give them an opportunity to sort of brighten the day. One of the candidates said, because we had tiny little daffodils, narcissus tete-a-tete, and they said, when I enter and leave my house now in the spring, I have that golden delight of seeing that, and seeing the bees link into it. So a second project I was involved in, this is the RHS New Bridgewater Garden, was social prescribing linked to GPs who prescribed through our social prescribing project. And this is Azici. This was working with Salford University. And, some of the critical qualitative stuff, the second one, I can honestly say, since coming here, I'm getting my mojo back. I'm cracking jokes, laughing at myself. It's done me the world of good. I'd say it saved me. So some really powerful impacts. But also, when we looked at, again, the sort of before and after measures in relation to that, what we saw was that before the intervention, and then we put the inventor in place, and after the intervention, we saw a 12% increase in the high well-being area. So a really positive link to those aspects. Now, we also did a survey, and then again, this was in collaboration with Sheffield University, and this was to just under 6,000 gardeners. And you can see the top 3 reasons for why people garden is pleasure and enjoyment, sensory reasons, and health benefits. So a real link to why they do that. So this study was really interested in, so is there a dose response curve in relation to self-reported health? So if you garden more, do you have increased health benefits or perceived increased health benefits? So this graph basically shows you the dark green is daily gardening, I garden daily, and the yellowish is never. And what you can see in relation to the perceived stress score is that there's a decrease in relation to the perceived stress score the more that you garden. And 2 to 3 times a sort of month is a sweetest spot in relation to getting the benefits. And then, of course, if you look at the mental well-being score, because you're reducing stress, you'll see an increase in well-being score, which was similar in the one that linked to the Salford project, similar kind of increase. And then physical activity. It isn't rocket science that the more you garden, the more physical activity you do. But what is really true in relation to the causation in relation to health is that everybody knows that the causation of physical health is good for our mental health. Gardening does give physical health, particularly for people who perhaps can't be as mobile as they age, and therefore the physical activity, the causation element links directly to that. And then in relation to well-gardened souls, there's absolute evidence around fostering social interconnections, promotes a sense of community. It's a real leveler up, because if you're passionate, no matter where your background is, if you're passionate about particular plants, you can instantly engage with another gardener or another person who's passionate about plants and have an instant connection of nature. There's elements of reconnecting isolated people through plants. So RHS Britain in Bloom is a very good example that brings people together from all walks of life to create beautiful spaces that people can benefit from. And it improves, as I showed in the Salford project, and also we did some work on Britain in Bloom, that it does improve a sense of pride, place. And another more interesting project is it also looks at reducing crime in disadvantaged neighborhoods. So I know in the US there's work that's been done where they've greened grey vacant lots, and they've shown getting people involved in doing that, so co-creation with the people in the area. They measured crime, knife, gun crime and violence before the intervention and after, and what they found was that absolutely there was a perceived decrease in those things, but there was also an actual decrease in those areas. And more work is looking at, you as a person, you have multiple microbes within your body that makes you function. I think it's something like just under 50% of you is other creatures. And this study basically what it did is it had three schools, and it looked at doing garden intervention into one of the schools. One of them was a forest school, one of them had no garden, and one of them already a garden. And they measured the microbes on the skin of the people and within the gut, and they found that those with the garden and the forest garden had microbes that were specifically linked to improved immunity. And then what they did is they put a garden into the empty garden space who didn't have those microbes, and within 6 months those microbes appeared within those areas. So lots of importance about why it's important to get dirty and to garden. Everyone was aware of how important domestic gardens were in relation to, or just having green spaces, even if it was a balcony or some pot plants in your house in small spaces. If you've got a house plant, you're a gardener. And basically, these reports show you that all the way across the world, this was just looking at environmental horticulture, so not food production, all across the world, that there's evidence base around the gardening aspect and how it was one of the saviours. So I would argue that horticulture and landscaping in our cities is a health right, and like food and medicine, it's essential, not a nice to have. Plants as pollution busters. So Tiana Blanusa, who is the scientist at the RHS, has been working on pollution and plants for the past over the past decade. And pollution costs roughly about 20 billion per year to government, and trees and other plants remove an estimated 1.5 million tonnes of air pollutants in the UK in a single year. But it's about the plants, so the right plants for the right place for the right purpose. So the RHS is working on a project called Plants for Purpose, which is all about identifying the key characters of plants in relation to the benefits that they provide to people. So, for example, the Contoniaster franchetti here at in the top there captured 20 times more particulate pollution than a Photinia red robin. And it's things like waxy leaves, scaly leaves, hairy leaves, rough leaves that all provide that element of capturing. And climate resilience of flood mitigation. So cost to us, the UK is 2.2 billion each year, but also there is a massive impact on people's mental and social health and well-being linked to these aspects, particularly around having to deal with a flood or having to deal with multiple floods. And it isn't really rocket science in that if we use and engineer plants which are photosynthesizing and removing water, but also storing water and having soil, you can see on the left-hand side, you can have significant differences from, a semi-housing plus vegetation having 20% runoff to complete no vegetation having 55% runoff, and different elements of doing that. So slowing the flow with vegetation is really important, because what that also means is that you don't overburden an extreme weather events, the sewage systems, and then the sewage systems reduce their impact by not putting pollution out into those rivers. So having more domestic garden or more cultivated landscapes in our cities can significantly contribute to the improved biodiversity of wildlife, of waterways. And what I would say is that we are animals too. Charles Darwin was actually ridiculed about saying we're related to animals. I've already mentioned that actually we're more than just an animal. We're a collection of microbes and creatures. And animals are very habitat dependent. And it's essential we give more consideration to our habitats and to focus on a preventative natural healthcare situation. Now, if you've read Das Gupta's review around the money and finances, he talks about the healthcare system and talks about the benefits that Greenspace can provide to that. Because I think we are in the middle of a species recovery for humans. And I'll tell you why I think that. Because in conservation biology, I've looked at species recoveries for plants and populations of plants. And all the things that you look at in relation to are they going extinct are very similar to what we're experiencing now. So they call hunting, but I would call that warfare. They've got stochastic environments, so extremes. So we've got extremes of weather. We've got pestilence, so we're having increased diseases and things linked to climate change, linked to shifts in areas. We have massive habitat destruction. I think just last year, one of the undergrounds flooded. So all of these things are classic signs of species recovery. And so what we need to do is to look for solutions, nature-based solutions, to help to improve that. But what a great way of doing it, in that actually through gardening, through cultivating landscapes within our cities, creating habitats that make a difference to our well-being, we also perhaps get some joy out of it, which is desperately needed in a world. We need a lot more joy, and we know that gardening creates joy. So giving an example here of the autonomic nervous system and the work that's happened in relation to work. If you look at the picture on the right hand side, on the left hand side you've got a very typical green area. On the right hand side you've got a city without green space, and there are several scenarios in your nervous system which triggers action that you do. So you have fight, flight, fawn, and freeze in relation to delivering things. And what we know is that actually, if you're in a situation where you have water, vegetation, food, and shelter, you link to no danger in relation to your evolutionary path. And therefore, you have the parasympathetic nervous system, rest and digest, triggering, which then decreases blood pressure, decreases blood sugar, strengthens the immune system. Whereas on the flip side, if you don't have those right habitats, you're in the fight or flight, and that increases blood pressure, increases blood sugar, suppresses the immune system. The biggest killers in the world are heart attacks, are stress, is dementia, is obesity. And some of these things that, we're talking around the gardening in relation to active engagement, but also in relation to cultivated landscapes, what they provide is very, very critical in relation to what we deliver in relation to providing services around exercise, physical activity, and making sure that people have space to grow. And there is a good economic argument for this as well. So Oxford Economics and the Environmental Horticultural Group, which has been running for 10 years, worked with Oxford Economics and Future Foresight to produce a growing economic report. We're going to the second round of doing another economic report, because this was done back in 2019. And what we can see is that there is a total potential GDP of 42 billion. And in that 2019, it was 28.8 billion, which is bigger than aerospace, and a large industry where green growth could absolutely happen. And total jobs, again, if we're looking at green infrastructure, green industries, there's a huge opportunity to inject money into developing more green jobs that deliver nature-based solutions through horticultural expertise. And that's going to be even more critical with a shifting climate. Bastin wrote a paper in 2018 that basically said that in 2050, looking at climate change scenarios, London will have the same climate as Barcelona. So we need to look at these cultivated landscapes as well as the natives to see which ones are going to hang behind. How many of those 1,500 natives are going to survive going forward? And what are the landscapes that we need biodiversity-wise to help with wildlife, but also linked to those aspects? So one of the things that we've been doing at RHS, and we'll look to publish this work sort of next year as part of our sustainability strategy, is to look at the pathways to improved health and environment. So it's around garden exposure or cultivated plant exposure. We see that improves intermediary health, stress and well-being outcomes, which then links to the improved longer-term health, stress and well-being outcomes. And there are aspects of the environment, our physiology, the psychological and the behavioral aspects that actually all improve in relation to those aspects. Because again, I say we are animals. And the other element that we're doing is looking at how much green space, what types of green space, and how do you interact with those green spaces, and how do you create those green spaces. So a lot of the work that we're doing, we have at the RHS garden, we have a environmental experimental setup of a well-being garden that was set out of the new Hilltop Home of Garden Science to look at these aspects. And these are some of the critical elements that need to be incorporated within a garden design to increase its well-being benefits. But also it's really important that you have a process in relation to how that works and integrates with society. And there's a really important element of capacity building in getting people to understand horticulture, understand the well-being stuff, and be equipped to have that knowledge base. I mean, I give the example of that, to become horticultural literate is a bit like reading a book. You don't start off with just trying to do things because you could do damage. Reading a book, you start with few words and then you learn and you get the expertise and capacity to be able to do that. And I think it's really important that when we're working with, as the RHS does on a number of projects, such as the Lewisham Hospital, when you work with them, you're also upskilling and engaging both the hospital, but also the staff, the visitors, and the surrounding community to build resilience. So that's basically the talk. Thanks very much.
Great. Alistair, that was fascinating. I have to say, from my own experiences of being an improvised gardener during lockdown, I understood subjectively the benefits of this, but to have the numbers and everything up there presented, I've been taking little screenshots of your presentation as I've gone on, because it's been so fascinating. I could ask lots and lots of questions. We do have 4 or 5 questions from our audience. We better do those first. The first one from Clive Bullen is, if you don't have a garden, what are the alternative ways to get in touch with nature and improved health? If you're in London in a flat, for example, what can you do? Is it parks, rivers? Any other suggestions?
So the first of all, the thing that I would say you can do is to get some indoor plants. So I'm in my home office at the moment. If you look at that thing behind me, that's a plant wall. It's a section of that. It's self-irrigating. It's put up there. It cost me £60. It's from Plant Box, and you can put plants in there, and that's been up there for 3 years. And I do a little bit of watering, but that's it. And I've got another plant next to me, which was peat-free from Gebben Green house plants that link to that. So I've seen some indoor house places that literally have gone absolutely mad. Have a look on Google. There are so many, they're kind of literally surrounded. One thing I've done, which I really love, is I've got a couple of palms, a parlor palm, which is pretty much indestructible. Because I've got solar on my roof, I've got a little uplifter light that I've plugged into the pot, and then on my roof, I basically have a tropical forest that's lit up with the leaves. Wow. And so, there's things that you can do around that. Make sure if you do buy a place with a view of green space. I mean, a lot of this work was linked with Ulrich. Historically, Ulrich did some work in a hospital a long time ago in the 80s, and he found 3 things. Those that had a view of nature rather than those that had a view of a grey wall had 3 benefits. 1, they got out of hospital quicker. Number 2, they had less medication. Number 3, they treated the nurses and doctors better. So I think that, but yeah, get involved with community projects. If you're a bit like me, I'm a bit of a kind of introvert, so I'm not very good in community things. Maybe get some of your pals to work with. So lots and lots of things. Talk to people. Look at what's on the RHS. Loads of information and offers there around what to do.
As we come on to...
I think in London we're really lucky because there are just so many green spaces distributed through London. It's not like New York where you've got one central park. There are so many parks distributed through London, and just to try and get out into the park and just find somewhere to sit and absorb that level of greenness, I think.
It's really important. I mean, the other thing is that there are several ways. So the headquarters of the RHS is in Victoria. There are several routes to my workplace. I choose to take the green route. So I've looked all the different routes and found the one which has the most green exposure as I'm walking through. So look for those things in your daily lives. Try and incorporate those things into that. The other great thing is the Merlin app. So I don't know if you've heard of the Merlin app. It's such a cool app. Basically, you can go out into nature, record the bird sound, and it tells you what birds are there. So do something engaging with it that's maybe a bit more than just walking in the green space.
There's a related question here about engaging with the London National Park City programme, which is trying to get everyone living in Greater London out into the natural environment and active. Do either of you have any comments on that programme?
I'm also involved in an organisation which you mentioned at the beginning, Pollinating London Together, and
Yep,
we're working with the National Park City. Very good initiative, and absolutely agree. Yeah, to try and get
yep.
people out.
And comments about, can we get this incorporated into town planning, architectural spaces, etc.?
Certainly in the City of London Planning Authority is trying very hard to make sure that there's really good recognition of spaces, and that in that public realm there is good green space, and in some cases that's roof gardens as well.
Mhm. Good. Right. Other questions coming up about unseasonal extreme weather, how climate change affects or threatens gardens, and someone is asking about safeguards against toxic plants like yew plants.
Yeah, so in relation to the extreme weathers, there is a project that we're currently working on in relation to looking at protecting our heritage. So because there was a project that was done out in Melbourne using the climate adaptation tool, BGCI, Botanic Garden Conservation International, and what that showed was that basically about 40% of the plants through climate modelling will be lost. So there is a real challenge there, and that's where the work with Plants for Purpose, but also the RHS is working across all cultivated landscape areas. So National Trust for Scotland, Kew, Edinburgh, Royal Historic Palaces, Royal Parks, all of those to pull together, looking at how can we deal with the resilience of that, and that information will be shared out at the early stages of work. And that's where also Plants for Purpose is really important, because we do need to get a better understanding of, what genetic diversity we have in the cultivated landscapes and what is going to be more resilient to those aspects. What was the second question? Apologies. What was?
We're talking about the dangers of toxic plants like yew and things
Yeah.
like that.
So I think this is really about education to the general public and in the wider thing about plants. I mean, my son, when he was a toddler, I had him out in the garden and sort of teaching him about those aspects. So, and one good example, like with you, is that you can talk about kill or cure. So Taxus brevifolia
Yeah.
is actually used in every chemotherapy treatment in the world. It uses Taxol. But at the same time, it cures at some element, but it's being done by doctors that know what they're doing, and therefore it can kill, and the red berries can kill, but actually you can eat the outer sides of the yew berries, but you perhaps don't want to tell them that. But there is these aspects of, I think, educating more people, getting more people connected with plants, and in scenarios that you've got, just make sure that you're not perhaps putting some of these plants in places, for example, in small infant areas or whatever. Just making sure that you work out your plant palette linked to that.
Great. We have a related question here, especially aimed at Heather. With your extensive background in sustainable development education, how do you see the role of horticultural education evolving to better address the challenges of climate change?
I think that's really interesting, isn't it? And I think one of the things that really needs to be addressed is this understanding of what horticulture is, which is what I started with. And actually, we need more people coming into horticulture, and we need to be sharing with them exactly what horticulture is, that it can be such a good career, it can take them all around the world, it does have such variety in it. And one of the ways to tackle that is to make young people realise that they can benefit their environment so much by understanding horticulture and taking some part in it. So, I mean, what we need to be doing is addressing climate change adaptation and mitigation. And horticulture is key to all of that. It's so important. And we just need to be making that connection with young people especially, as to what the opportunities are for them to come through and help with the solution.
And would you say, Heather, that's aimed at students, undergraduates, or secondary schooling, or primary education? Or,
All of them, all of them. And I mean, I think the younger you start, making people realise exactly what horticulture means and what they can take part in, then the better. And there might be a bit of falling off through the early teens, there might not be, but as long as they know that, they can come back to it at any point. Some people will take it through their choices of A levels, degrees, going on to masters. Others will come at it as a second career later. But it's really important that everybody understands that.
I have a
I
nice
think
example in the street where I live, where I know of a young man who was 11 at the time, becoming friends with a neighbor who was 80 over gardening and bonding together over plants and things. So,
I
Alice,
think one of the things that the environmental horticultural group have taught to government is that to build resilience, what we'd like to see is that every school child in the UK has the skills to grow, because those skills are so critically important in relation to food growing, in relation to understanding plants, in relation to just the basic skills, because I think that would also reconnect a lot more people to nature, and would
yeah,
also have the benefit around some of those aspects. The other thing I would say is that if people are interested, on the 25th to the 28th of September at the Hilltop Home of Gardening Science at RHS Wisley, we're holding the third International Society for Horticultural Science Symposium on greener cities. And we'll have speakers from all over the world. So have a look on the website. They'll be talking about all sorts of things around what you can do in relation to climate resilience. So we've got people from Singapore, Australia, USA, Canada, coming to share their experiences. So it'll be fabulous.
great. Okay, we've got now probably the last couple of questions, some science questions. So we have a question on what is the role of hairs on leaves in reducing things like urban island heat effect? Is that positive or negative? So the role of
Um,
hairs.
Hairs on leaves in relation to cooling.
Yeah,
I think it really will depend on the type of plants that you have. So there could be, for example, in the Mediterranean, there are very hairy leaves which help to and also grey, which help to reflect the light. But it isn't just the morphological aspects; it's the physiological aspects of those plants. So there are possible benefits of plants. So we're doing some work at the moment looking at insulating and cooling of different types of plants, linking to potentially retrofit of buildings. Because in the winter they provide insulation, in the summer they can transpire. So there's multiple, and these are the interesting thing. It's multiple characters, traits
Mm,
that we're looking at, because you may have a hairy leaved plant, but it may not be transpiring as much as something that could be transpiring a lot and then cooling that surrounding area. But it really is sort of still working towards understanding what are those best character traits, so that then we can start to look at how do you select and breed for those. But you say in the Mediterranean, usually they're acquainted with either sort of uh, reserving moisture within the plant, or will have a sort of area which is more white and globose to help to reduce the amount of transpiration.
yeah, I was going to say that it very often it just slows down the drought factor, doesn't it? It slows down that loss of water by trapping that layer of humid air right next to the plant. But at
Yeah,
the same time, it also prevents them from cooling down because they're not transpiring to the same level. So,
yeah.
yeah,
It's multiple
all
services,
systems
and that's
all sorts.
planting different things together. It's really important,
Mm,
and getting multiple
yeah.
services from multiple plants.
yeah. Yeah, Alistair, you mentioned a symposium a couple of minutes ago. Is that symposium going to be online for people who can't otherwise attend?
I don't think it. I don't think it is. I think it's in person, but I think there will be a whole bunch of information, and there will be a proceedings linked to that. So I think at the moment there's been 70 people submitted abstracts and papers. So there'll be a whole bunch of papers that come out linked to that.
Yeah,
There is something that's online, and that is that we did a series of Green City briefings with the AIPH. And so if you just Google the AIPH, you'll be able to find the Green City briefings that we did and which are ongoing, involve cities from around the world. It includes quite a lot about nature-based solutions and planning and changes to planning.
yeah, good. I have a question. I was really interested, Alistair, in what you were saying about the two urban studies that you did. One was in Bridgewater, and I didn't quite catch the earlier one. You were talked about how it improved the environment, it made people feel very happy and engaged with nature. Was there also an effect that some urban environments you get vandalism and things like that? Did you notice that that actually decreased as a result? When
So
people
I've got,
see
yeah.
beautiful, nice front gardens, does that what's their impact?
I mean, yes. I think, and one of the impacts, which was quite unusual for the street. I didn't think that this would be the reason. One of the reasons why that street maintained its planters and other things. So we were concerned about that. But one
Mhm.
of the participants was the local drug dealer.
Aha,
And the local drug dealer said, "Come here, Al, come here." And I said, "I was like, all right, how you doing? How's the garden going?" He said, "Nobody in this street is going to touch these planters." So you even had. It is sad that unfortunately that drug dealer has passed away now, but
gosh,
but that's how rough it is, and that's why these little bits of space are so important, and it doesn't need a lot, so it's not that expensive to make the difference, and it creates jobs. So it's so I think there is that stuff, but there is definite distinct. One thing that I'd love to do, and I did ask Phil Askew from Peabody Trust about. People don't really want to spray on fences that are covered with ivy.
good, yeah,
So, just imagine what is the total budget of cleanup in London of
yeah,
graffiti?
mm,
Right? Why not put that budget to just greening up everywhere where people
yeah.
can't spray on? Maybe they will start to spray ivy leaves, but it doesn't look as good, does it? I don't think. Not that I'm a professional paint sprayer, but there are
I,
things. But also, that adds biodiversity, it adds cooling, it has lovely green colours with well-being. Most people say ivy is a problem. Well, it isn't, because there's research showing that it doesn't cause problems. It says it protects buildings around aspects. Just depends on what plants you choose. So I think we just need to think differently about what we're spending on to the outcome, because again, cleaning those spray paints off is using an awful lot of chemicals that aren't very good for biodiversity and others. But I've yet for someone to come up with the bill for cleaning of London.
we'll
Um,
work on that.
So
Good.
there was a project that was undertaken in Philadelphia, and where you get those small green spaces, triangles of green spaces at the ends of rows of houses. They were being used by drug dealers, being used as tips, and what they actually did was to just put fences around them, and the fences were probably 20 centimeters high, not very high at all. And they found that by putting fences around them, that people then began to look after them. And as soon as they got looked after by somebody, then that really stopped the drug dealing, it stopped the dumping. It's surprising how little you have to do sometimes to
Great,
just make these things a lot safer and more valuable to everybody.
good. And with that very positive summing up. I could also say, Heather, that we've had a message from Audrey Tim at AIH that's appreciating the support of the Worshipful Company of Gardeners. That's great. So I'm afraid we're going to have to wrap up there. The time is over. I will briefly say that there are forthcoming lectures in this series, which will be almost as good as this absolutely fascinating webinar. But with that, I think we can finish the broadcast. Alistair and Heather, thank you so much. That's been an absolutely fascinating couple of presentations. I look forward to reviewing it properly and getting copies of the materials as well at some point. But thank you very much indeed.
Thank you. Thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you.